The reading of my mother's will felt like a physical blow. To my son Michael, I leave the family home. To my daughter Rebecca, I leave my investment portfolio and jewelry collection. The attorney paused, shuffled his papers, and moved on to discuss tax implications. My name, Sarah, her middle child who had spent the last 5 years as her caretaker, wasn't even mentioned. It wasn't just the inheritance I lost that day. It was the realization that despite everything I had sacrificed, I was invisible to the people who should have valued me most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My siblings avoided eye contact as we sat in that mahogany-paneled law office. The sound of leather squeaking beneath Michael's expensive suit echoed in the silence as he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Rebecca's French-manicured nails tapped methodically against her designer handbag, the same handbag I'd helped Mom pick out as Rebecca's Christmas gift last year while she was too busy with her networking cruise to visit. The air smelled of stale coffee and privilege, the kind my siblings wore as comfortably as their tailored clothes. Michael, the eldest at 43, embodied corporate success with his precise haircut and perpetual smartphone notifications. The golden child who'd moved across the country 15 years ago, building his empire in finance while calling Mom once a month like clockwork. Rebecca, 38, lived just 40 minutes away, but visited less frequently than seasonal allergies. Her real estate empire and social media lifestyle didn't leave much room for hospital visits or medication, schedules. And then there was me, Sarah, 40 years old, and the one who had put my graphic design career on hold to move back home when Mom's Parkinson's progressed beyond what she could manage alone. The one who administered medications, drove to doctor appointments, cooked meals that accommodated her increasingly difficult swallowing, and stayed up nights when the tremors were too violent for sleep. The one who managed her finances, read to her when her vision blurred, and made her laugh when depression threatened to swallow her whole. If there are no questions about the disbursement of assets, Attorney Wilson said, closing his leather portfolio with a definitive snap, we can proceed to the paperwork. I raised my hand slightly, feeling ridiculous, like a schoolgirl rather than a middle-aged woman. Excuse me. My voice came out hoarse, barely audible. I cleared my throat and tried again. There must be some mistake. I'm not mentioned at all. The attorney's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Was it pity? Discomfort? He adjusted his glasses and reopened the document. I've reviewed the will thoroughly, Ms. Lawson. There are no provisions for you specifically named in this document. Rebecca finally looked at me, her expression a carefully constructed mask of sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. Sarah, Mom must have assumed you'd taken enough already, living rent-free all these years. The words stung with precision. Living rent-free. As if the entire arrangement had been for my benefit rather than Mom's. As if the 24/7 caregiving that saved them thousands in nursing home costs was somehow a vacation. Michael cleared his throat. We should discuss this as a family later, not here. His tone suggested there would be no real discussion at all. I nodded mechanically, refusing to let tears form. The room suddenly felt airless, constricting. The walls of certificates and legal texts on the bookshelves seemed to bend inward. I had spent 5 years putting everyone else first. My mother's needs, my siblings' freedom to pursue their lives unencumbered by responsibility. And in return, I had been erased. As Attorney Wilson continued discussing estate taxes and probate timelines, my mind drifted to the countless nights I'd spent helping Mom sort through old photographs for her memory books. The days I'd transcribed her stories so they wouldn't be lost to time and illness. The birthday I'd spent in the emergency room when pneumonia nearly took her, while Michael was skiing in Aspen, and Rebecca was at a charity gala she'd helped organize. I remembered holding Mom's hand, prompting her when she forgot my name on her worst days, assuring her it was okay, that I understood, that I was still Sarah, still her daughter, still there. Sarah? Attorney Wilson's voice pulled me back to the present. Everyone was standing, the meeting apparently over. Do you need a moment? No, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm fine. A lie, but a necessary one. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I gathered my practical, worn leather bag, so different from Rebecca's status symbol, and stood. I'll need to be out of the house by when? I asked, the practical question masking the emotional devastation beneath. Michael and Rebecca exchanged glances. There's no rush, Michael said, his generosity hollow given that he lived in Boston and had no immediate plans to occupy Mom's, now his, house in Denver. 2 weeks should be sufficient, Rebecca interjected, always the pragmatist, when it came to other people's inconveniences. I want to start renovations before the summer market. Of course she did. The 4-bedroom Craftsman in Cherry Creek would sell for well over $1 million with the right updates. Mom had purchased it for $89,000 in 1979. 2 weeks is fine, I replied, my voice flat. I didn't mention that I'd need to find not just housing but storage for Mom's medical equipment. The specialized bed I'd acquired through 3 grant applications. The lift chair I'd spent hours researching to find the perfect balance of comfort and functionality. We walked silently to the elevator, the 3 Lawson siblings together yet completely separate. As we descended to the lobby, I noticed Rebecca texting rapidly, probably to her contractor already. Michael checked his watch 3 times in 60 seconds, mentally returning to his real life, the one that mattered. In the parking lot, Rebecca touched my shoulder briefly. We should get together for lunch soon, process everything. I nodded, knowing it wouldn't happen. It hadn't happened when Mom was diagnosed, or when she could no longer drive, or when she first forgot my birthday. It wouldn't happen now. Michael was already on a phone call as he walked to his rental car. He gave a distracted wave without making eye contact. I watched them leave, Michael to his hotel, Rebecca to her suburban mansion, before I got into my 10-year-old Subaru. The car that had transported Mom to countless medical appointments, its back seat periodically converted to accommodate her wheelchair on days when walking was impossible. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, and finally allowed myself to feel the magnitude of what had just happened. The morning of the press conference dawned with a crystalline autumn clarity, the kind of day that makes even weathered, brick buildings like Parkside glow with unexpected warmth. We'd chosen to hold the event in the factory's vast main floor, still raw and unrenovated, with sunlight streaming through tall, dust-speckled windows. Folding chairs faced a simple podium, while architectural renderings displayed on easels showed what this space would become: a bustling marketplace with local vendor stalls, community gathering spaces, and a central atrium preserving the building's industrial character while infusing it with new purpose. I arrived 2 hours early, walking the perimeter of the room, footsteps echoing in the emptiness soon to be filled with voices and activity. Touching the exposed brick walls, I thought about the hands that had built this place, the workers who had once filled it with productive energy, and the generations of East Westbrook residents who had passed by its shuttered windows, perhaps never imagining it would come alive again. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. TV crews setting up outside. The Harrington contingent just pulled up in 3 black SUVs. Game faces on. I smiled at her characteristic blend of humor and battle readiness. This wasn't just a press conference announcing a grant. It was the public culmination of a negotiation that had shifted power in subtle but significant ways. How we presented ourselves today would set the tone for the partnership moving forward. Outside, I found Gregory and Victoria Harrington surveying the building's exterior, with expressions that blended curiosity with barely concealed discomfort at being in East Westbrook. Bernard Wellington stood nearby, looking more at ease than his colleagues. Eleanor Reed had just arrived in her modest sedan, her driver helping her navigate the uneven pavement with her cane. "Marcus!" Gregory called, extending his hand with practiced cordiality. "Quite a historic day for all of us." "Indeed," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "We're grateful to be writing a new chapter in Parkside's story with the Foundation's support." Victoria's smile remained fixed as she glanced at the neighborhood surroundings. "The area has potential. I'm sure property values will respond positively to this investment." "The community has inherent value beyond real estate metrics," Eleanor interjected smoothly, joining our circle. "That's what Walter always understood about East Westbrook." Gregory's expression flickered at the mention of his grandfather. During our negotiations, he had never directly acknowledged the historical documents we'd uncovered, but Bernard had confirmed privately that Gregory had reviewed them. The revised agreement, with its provision for a historical exhibit, was the only indication that the family had reckoned with this aspect of their legacy. "Shall we proceed inside?" I suggested. "Community members are gathering, and we should begin on time." The main floor had transformed during my brief absence outside. Nearly 300 East Westbrook residents now filled the chairs, with more standing along the walls. Former Parkside workers occupied the front row, some wearing faded company pins or caps from their employment days. Local business owners, families, students from neighborhood schools, and community organizers created a tapestry of faces reflecting the diverse, resilient character of East Westbrook. As the Harringtons entered, a respectful hush fell over the crowd. This wasn't the deferential silence of the gala ballroom, but something more measured: acknowledgement without submission, recognition without reverence. The program began with a welcome from Reverend Thomas, followed by a historical overview of Parkside from Ms. Johnson, one of the former workers. She spoke plainly about both the factory's importance to the community and its abandonment, stopping short of mentioning the broken ownership promise, but looking directly at Gregory as she described Walter Harrington's vision of worker participation. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium conscious of the diverse expectations in the room. The Harringtons anticipated appropriate gratitude. The community wanted assurance of genuine control. The media sought a compelling narrative of urban renewal. "Today marks not a beginning but a reconnection," I said, surveying the gathered faces. "Parkside has always belonged to East Westbrook, not just physically, but spiritually. For decades, its empty windows have represented disconnection between past and future, between promise and fulfillment, between resources and need." I gestured to the architectural renderings. "What we're creating here isn't just a building renovation. It's an ecosystem of opportunity, where entrepreneurs can access affordable space to grow businesses, where young people can develop skills, where community members can gather for classes, meals, celebrations, and commerce. An ecosystem owned and governed by East Westbrook itself." I acknowledged the Foundation's contribution directly. The Harrington Foundation's investment makes this possible at a scale and timeline that truly serves community needs. Their willingness to support a community-led vision, rather than imposing external solutions, represents philanthropy at its best, as partnership rather than patronage. Victoria's smile widened at this public affirmation, though Eleanor's slight nod told me she recognized the subtle distinction I was establishing. "Parkside's future honors its past," I continued. "Walter Harrington established this factory with progressive ideas about worker participation and community benefit. The governance structure we've created for the renovated Parkside, with majority community control, inclusive decision-making processes, and equitable distribution of benefits, builds on that legacy while addressing contemporary needs." Gregory shifted in his seat at this oblique reference to his grandfather's original intentions. I concluded by inviting Destiny from Horizon Coffee to speak about her experience with our business incubation programs and how Parkside would multiply such opportunities. Her authentic passion and entrepreneurial success offered tangible proof of what community-led development could achieve, more compelling than any theory or promise I could articulate. When Gregory took the podium to represent the foundation, his practiced public speaking was evident, but something in his delivery seemed more thoughtful than at previous foundation events I'd observed. My grandfather often spoke about business as a vehicle for community prosperity, he said, departing from what I suspected were prepared remarks. In supporting the Parkside project, the foundation reconnects with that aspect of our family legacy. We've been impressed by the community engagement model Marcus and his team have developed, and we believe it creates a sustainable framework for lasting impact. This acknowledgement, subtle but meaningful, suggested that our negotiations had prompted some genuine reflection within the Harrington family, not just strategic concessions. The formal program concluded with a symbolic key presentation, representing the transfer of resources needed to transform Parkside from concept to reality. Rather than Gregory simply handing me the key, we invited Mae Johnson, the eldest former Parkside worker present, to join us. Gregory gave the key to her, and she then passed it to me, a choreographed moment that honored the connection between past workers and future community ownership. As formal remarks concluded and attendees began mingling, examining architectural plans and sharing refreshments provided by neighborhood businesses, I found myself in a quiet corner with Eleanor Reed. "Well executed," she said, watching the interaction thoughtfully. The historical framing was particularly effective, acknowledging Walter's vision without explicitly mentioning Charles's betrayal. "Direct accusation wouldn't serve our purpose," I replied. "We need a working relationship with the foundation going forward." Eleanor nodded. "Strategic restraint. The community gets what it needs without forcing the Harringtons into a public reckoning they would inevitably resist." She turned to face me directly. "You've managed a delicate balance, Marcus, leveraging historical truth for justice without weaponizing it for retribution. That balance was only possible because you provided context I wouldn't otherwise have had," I acknowledged. "Your connection to Walter and your understanding of the family dynamics gave us essential perspective." She tapped her cane gently against the floor. "I've waited 50 years to see Walter's vision for Parkside at least partially fulfilled. The community ownership model you've created isn't exactly what he envisioned, but it honors the core principle that those who create value should share in its benefits." Across the room, I noticed Victoria engaged in what appeared to be genuine conversation with Diane Rodriguez and several community council members. Gregory stood nearby, studying one of the architectural renderings with Bernard Wellington. The carefully maintained social boundaries evident at the gala seemed slightly more permeable in this setting, where the Harringtons were visitors in East Westbrook rather than hosts on their own territory. "Will you remain involved as we move forward?" I asked Eleanor. "In a limited capacity," she replied. "My health doesn't permit the engagement I'd prefer, but I've established a separate fund to support programming within Parkside once it's operational, focused specifically on youth entrepreneurship and arts education." This was news to me. "You didn't mention this during our negotiations." "It wasn't relevant to those discussions, and I preferred to make the contribution quietly, without the public recognition the Harringtons require." Her eyes crinkled slightly. "Some philanthropy works better from the shadows." Before I could respond, Victoria approached us, her social smile firmly in place. "Eleanor, I didn't realize you were so familiar with East Westbrook. You seem to know everyone here." "I've maintained connections Walter established decades ago," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Community relationships were important to him." Victoria nodded, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts on this implicit contrast with current Harrington priorities. "The press coverage is quite positive. Several reporters have approached me about feature stories on the Foundation's innovative approach to community partnership. She glanced at me. You've positioned this project very skillfully, Marcus. The project speaks for itself, I replied. We're just ensuring the narrative reflects the reality of community leadership. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Indeed. Well, I should circulate a bit more before we depart. Eleanor, we'll see you at the next board meeting, if my health permits, Eleanor replied non-committally. After Victoria moved away, Eleanor chuckled softly. She still hasn't figured out whether I'm an ally or adversary in this situation. Aren't you both? I suggested. Perhaps. In any case, she's adapting to the new reality you've created. The Foundation needs this project to succeed as much as East Westbrook does now. Their reputation has become connected to its outcomes. Eleanor glanced toward the Harringtons. That shared stake creates accountability more powerful than any contract clause. As the event wound down, I made my way through the crowd, thanking community members for attending, answering questions from reporters, and ensuring our team had collected contact information from prospective volunteers and partners. The energy in the room remained vibrant, a palpable sense of possibility that contrasted sharply with the abandoned emptiness I'd encountered when first arriving that morning. Near the main entrance, I found my grandmother waiting patiently. She hadn't spoken during the formal program, but had watched everything with characteristic quiet attentiveness. Now, as the crowd thinned, she approached me with a small smile. Big success today, she said, squeezing my arm. Your mother would be proud. My throat tightened unexpectedly. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier, before the Parkside project had fully taken shape, but not before I'd shared my dreams for it with her. Her belief in the possibility of transformation, both for buildings and for communities, had helped sustain my vision even when practical challenges seemed overwhelming. I think she would be, I agreed, swallowing past the emotion. She always said empty buildings were just opportunities waiting for the right people to recognize them. My grandmother nodded, still scanning the dwindling crowd. The rich lady, with the cane, she knew your building's story already, yes? Before you told her? Nothing escaped my grandmother's perception. Yes, she had her own connection to Parkside's history. Thought so. She watches the Harringtons like I used to watch families I cleaned for. My grandmother's expression turned thoughtful. Rich people have their own battles we don't see, but they still need to do right thing in the end. As the last attendees departed and our team began clearing the space, I took a final moment alone in the center of the vast room. Sunlight had shifted during the event, now casting longer shadows across the worn concrete floor. In a year's time, this space would be transformed, filled with vendor stalls, community gathering areas, and the energy of renewed purpose. Yet something essential would remain: the bones of the building, the spirit of its original intention, the connection to generations of East Westbrook residents who had invested their labor and hopes within these walls. Our renovation would honor that continuity while creating something new that truly belonged to the community. My phone chimed with a text from Diane. Channel 4 wants an extended interview tomorrow morning. Also, 3 more small business owners want to get on the waiting list for Parkside spaces. We're going to need a bigger building. I smiled at her enthusiasm while typing a quick response. The press conference had been just one milestone in a journey that would involve countless more challenges: construction complexities, program development, community engagement, ongoing negotiations with the Foundation. But today had established an essential foundation: East Westbrook leading its own development, supported by resources it had rightfully earned rather than gratefully received. 2 days after the press conference, I received an unexpected call from Bernard Wellington. His tone was friendly but businesslike. Marcus, I wanted to let you know about a development at yesterday's Foundation Board meeting that may interest you. I'm listening, I replied, curious about what could prompt this personal call rather than a formal communication. The board voted to establish a Community Development Advisory Council to inform our grant-making moving forward, he explained. The council will include representatives from neighborhoods we serve, with a mandate to evaluate how our investments impact communities directly. I sat forward in my chair. That's a significant structural change for the foundation. Indeed. Gregory introduced the proposal himself, citing the Parkside project as a model for more effective community engagement. Bernard paused. He specifically recommended you as the inaugural chairperson, should you be willing to serve. The irony was impossible to miss, from charity case to recommended council chair in a matter of weeks. But beyond the personal vindication, this represented a meaningful shift in the foundation's approach, potentially benefiting communities beyond East Westbrook. I'm interested, I said carefully. Though I'd want to ensure the council has actual influence on funding decisions, not just advisory window dressing. The governance structure gives the council review authority over all community development grants above $1 million, Bernard replied. Not veto power, but substantial influence. Eleanor was quite insistent on that point during the discussion. Of course, Eleanor had been involved. Her strategic vision extended well beyond Parkside itself. I'd like to review the full charter before deciding, I said. And I'd want to ensure diverse representation from multiple communities, not just East Westbrook. We expected nothing less, Bernard said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I'll send the materials today, but I wanted you to know that this change is happening, regardless of whether you personally choose to participate. After our call ended, I sat contemplating what this development meant. The Harrington Foundation wasn't transformed overnight. Centuries of wealth and power dynamics don't shift through a single project or policy change. But something fundamental had begun to move, like the first crack in a dam that eventually reshapes the entire flow of water. By leveraging the historical truth about Parkside, we'd not only secured better terms for our specific project, but potentially influenced how the foundation would approach community relationships broadly. The ripple effects might benefit neighborhoods and initiatives far beyond what we'd initially imagined. Construction on Parkside began 3 weeks later, once permits cleared and contracts were finalized. The community celebrated with a groundbreaking ceremony that featured former factory workers turning the first ceremonial shovels of dirt alongside young entrepreneurs who would occupy the renovated spaces. Victoria and Gregory Harrington attended, but remained appropriately in the background, present but not centered, supportive but not controlling. They were learning a new role in relation to East Westbrook, one that honored the community's agency rather than presuming dependence on their benevolence. As winter settled over the city, Parkside's transformation accelerated. Each week brought visible progress, environmental remediation completed, structural reinforcements installed, new windows that maintained the historical character while providing modern efficiency. Community members regularly toured the construction site, offering input on design details and practical considerations that professional architects might have overlooked. In January, 6 months after the press conference, we held a midpoint celebration inside the partially renovated main floor. Though construction dust still filled the air and temporary lighting created dramatic shadows, the space had already begun its rebirth. The community marketplace area had taken shape, with outlines marked for vendor stalls and central gathering spaces. The second-floor educational facilities were framed out, with classroom and workshop areas clearly defined. Eleanor Reed attended despite the winter chill, bundled in a stylish wool coat and using her cane to navigate the still rough floors. As we stood together surveying the progress, she seemed particularly drawn to the area we had designated for the historical exhibit, chronicling Parkside's complete story. We've located original manufacturing equipment to display, I told her, pointing to marked spaces. And several former workers have contributed photographs, uniforms, and personal items from their time here. Will Walter's employee ownership plan be included? She asked directly. Yes, alongside Catherine Bell's journal excerpts and oral histories from workers who experienced the transition after his death. I glanced at her. The exhibit doesn't explicitly accuse the Harrington family of wrongdoing, but it presents the complete chronology, including the legal battle over ownership. Eleanor nodded with satisfaction. Truth without accusation. The facts speak clearly enough without editorial commentary. The Harringtons haven't objected to our content plans, I noted. Bernard reviewed the outline and simply asked that we include Walter's full vision for worker participation, not just the ownership transfer. A reasonable request that actually strengthens the historical narrative, Eleanor observed. Gregory is adapting more thoughtfully than I expected. Across the vast space, I could see Gregory himself in conversation with Hector Rodriguez, gesturing toward the partially completed ceiling trusses. The 78-year-old former maintenance worker was describing something with animated hands, and Gregory appeared to be listening with genuine interest. They're discussing the original ventilation system, Eleanor explained, following my gaze. Hector has knowledge no architectural plans could provide. The building's quirks and character that only someone who worked here would understand. This spontaneous exchange between the foundation chairman and a former worker symbolized something important. The beginning of genuine dialogue across divisions of wealth and position that had once seemed unbridgeable. It wasn't equality, in any absolute sense, but it represented progress toward more authentic recognition of each other's humanity and value. By midsummer, Parkside's exterior renovation was complete, with the brick facade restored to its original beauty and new, signage identifying it as Parkside Community Center in bold letters, with, in partnership with the Harrington Foundation, in smaller text below. Interior work continued, but several areas were sufficiently complete to begin limited programming. The first activity to launch was our Youth Entrepreneurship Summer Camp, where teens from East Westbrook developed business plans, prototyped products, and learned practical skills from local business owners. The Harrington Foundation's quarterly newsletter featured the program prominently, with photographs showing diverse young people engaged in hands-on learning in spaces that blended historical industrial elements with contemporary design. Victoria visited during the final presentation day, when students pitched their business concepts to a panel of local entrepreneurs and potential micro-investors. She moved through the space with less visible discomfort than during her first visit to our community center, stopping to speak with several young participants about their ideas. Remarkable creativity, she commented as we walked between presentation stations. And such poise in presenters so young. They're developing skills many of them already use informally, I explained. Many have been helping with family businesses or creating side hustles since they were much younger. We're just providing structure and resources to amplify what they already know. Victoria studied a display where a 15-year-old girl was demonstrating eco-friendly household products she had developed using traditional recipes from her grandmother. I've been thinking about something you said during our negotiations, Victoria said unexpectedly, about the difference between charity and justice. About how East Westbrook doesn't need saviors, but rather recognition of its inherent assets and capabilities. I nodded, surprised by this reference to conversations that had often been tense and adversarial. I didn't fully understand what you meant at the time, she continued. I think I'm beginning to see it more clearly now. Before I could respond, Eleanor Reed appeared, moving slowly with her cane, but with purpose in her expression. Victoria, I see you've met our young entrepreneurs, she said pleasantly. The transformation continued as June unfurled into July. I spent mornings at local cafes with my laptop, rebuilding my design portfolio and connecting with potential clients. Afternoons were dedicated to preparing for the revelation to come, organizing Mom's documents, creating a timeline of Michael's deceptions, and researching resources for gambling addiction. Not out of malice, but because when the truth emerged, my brother would need help, not punishment. My first major design contract came through unexpectedly, a complete rebranding package for a woman-owned sustainable clothing company. The owner, Lucia Mendez, had worked with Mom years earlier and sought me out specifically after hearing I was back in the field. "Your mother always said you were twice the designer she ever was," Lucia told me over coffee at our first meeting. "She showed me your portfolio every chance she got, said working with you was like watching a forest grow, quiet but unstoppable." This revelation stunned me. Mom had been marketing my work? Even as I cared for her, she'd been nurturing my professional future in ways I never realized. I threw myself into Lucia's project with renewed passion, creating designs that honored her company's commitment to environmental and social responsibility. The work connected me to a part of myself I'd feared might have withered during the caregiving. Years. My creative intuition, my visual voice, my ability to translate concepts into compelling imagery. As my professional identity strengthened, I began to imagine new possibilities for the house that would soon be mine. Not just a place to live, but a space to create and connect. What if I converted the downstairs guest room into a proper design studio? What if the backyard became a gathering place for creative community events? What if Mom's accessible modifications became features rather than elements to hide or remove? 20 days before the scheduled meeting with Patricia Hammond, I drove past the house again. The construction dumpsters were gone, and a "coming soon" real estate sign stood in the front yard, complete with Rebecca's smiling professional photograph. The renovations must be complete, the stage set for a sale that would never happen. I didn't feel the anger I'd expected, just a calm certainty about what needed to be done. Rebecca had invested significant money in those renovations, money she would never recoup once the real will was revealed. I made a mental note to discuss reimbursing her for those costs. Not because I owed it legally, but because holding on to bitterness would only diminish the life I was trying to build. That evening, I received a text from Michael, the first direct communication in over a month. "Estate sale this weekend. Final chance if there's anything you want to claim." I stared at the message, understanding its subtext. This was my last opportunity to salvage pieces of Mom's life, our shared life, before strangers picked through what remained. The timing seemed deliberate, designed to emphasize my exclusion from the inheritance. A final reminder of what I'd lost, or what they thought I'd lost. I replied simply, "I'll be there Saturday morning, thank you." That night, I dreamed of butterflies, thousands of them, emerging from chrysalises hidden throughout the house. They filled every room with vibrant movement, transforming the space from static to alive. I woke feeling strangely energized, as if the dream had been a meditation on the changes to come. Saturday arrived with perfect Colorado summer weather, crisp, morning air giving way to golden sunshine. I arrived at the house early, before the estate sale was scheduled to begin. Rebecca's car was already in the driveway, along with several vehicles I didn't recognize. Probably the estate sale organizers. The front door was propped open with a decorative brick. Inside, the house had been transformed. The walls were painted a trendy gray-white, the original hardwood floors refinished to a high shine. Staging furniture, sleek, modern, and impersonal, filled the living spaces. Price tags hung from lamps, side tables, and the few remaining pieces of Mom's furniture, deemed valuable enough to sell rather than donate. Rebecca stood in the kitchen, directing two young assistants as they arranged vintage kitchenware on the counter. She wore her real estate uniform, a tailored blazer over dark jeans, statement necklace, hair smoothed into a perfect bob. The uniform of competence and success. "Sarah," she said, sounding vaguely surprised despite the text exchange. "You're early." "I wanted some time before the crowds," I explained. "Is that okay?" She glanced at her watch. "Sure. Sale starts At 10. Anything with a blue tag is already sold to dealers, but the rest is fair game. I nodded, taking in the clinical efficiency with which our family home had been converted into a retail space. Is Michael here? He flew in late last night. He's upstairs cataloging Dad's old records for the music collectors. Her tone suggested this was the most involvement Michael had shown in the entire process. I moved through the transformed house with a strange sense of detachment, as if touring a museum exhibition rather than the space where I'd spent 5 intensive years. In the study, Mom's bookshelves had been styled with decorative objects interspersed among a curated selection of her books. Only the ones with attractive spines, I noticed, not her beloved mystery paperbacks or dog-eared poetry collections. On the desk sat a collection of framed family photographs, carefully arranged to suggest generational continuity. I picked up one I particularly treasured, Mom and me at Garden of the Gods, arms around each other, laughing at some forgotten joke. I'd taken hundreds of photos of Mom during her illness, documenting good days, small victories, genuine smiles. Most had been stored on my personal cloud drive, but this one had been framed and displayed in her bedroom. "That's not for sale," Rebecca said from the doorway, making me jump slightly. "The family photos are being divided between Michael and me after the sale." I set the frame down carefully. "Would it be possible for me to have this one? It has special meaning." Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Reluctance? Guilt? "I suppose that would be fine. Any others?" "Maybe a few," I admitted. "I'll show you which ones." We moved through the staged rooms together, maintaining a careful politeness. I selected just 5 photographs, moments that captured the real Mom, not the posed holiday portraits or formal family groupings. Rebecca marked them with small post-it notes, officially exempting them from the sale. In the living room, I paused before a small watercolor hanging on the wall, one of Mom's paintings from before her diagnosis. It depicted the view from our family cabin in Estes Park, a place we'd vacationed every summer until my parents' divorce. "Is this for sale?" I asked, noting the absence of a price tag. "No," Rebecca replied. "Michael wants the paintings for his house in Boston." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. In just 10 days, I could reclaim all of Mom's artwork if I chose to. But the knowledge didn't diminish the ache of seeing her creative expressions treated as decorative assets rather than extensions of her spirit. As we completed our circuit of the first floor, Michael appeared on the stairs. He looked tired, the confident facade I remembered from the will reading now frayed at the edges. His designer shirt was wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with fatigue, or stress, or both. "Sarah," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "Didn't know you were coming." "I texted her about the sale," Rebecca interjected. "She's just claiming a few photographs." Michael nodded, descending the remaining stairs. Up close, I could see the subtle signs of someone under extreme pressure, a slight tremor in his hands, perspiration at his temples despite the air-conditioned interior. "How are you doing?" I asked quietly. He seemed taken aback by the simple inquiry, as if he'd prepared for accusations or demands but not basic human concern. "Fine, busy with work. You know how it is." But I didn't know, because Michael had never actually explained what he did in his finance job, had never shared the details of his supposedly successful life. Had that been to maintain distance, or to conceal the gambling that was apparently consuming his resources? "And you?" he asked belatedly. "Found a place to live?" "Not yet," I replied truthfully. "I'm staying with a friend while I figure things out." An awkward silence fell, filled with everything unsaid. I wondered what he would do when he learned the truth, about the loan, about the real will, about Mom's knowledge of his addiction. Would he fight it legally? Deny everything? Disappear back to Boston and cut contact completely? Or was there a possibility, however small, that truth might set him free from the web of deception he'd constructed. I should finish upstairs before people arrive, he said, already retreating. Take whatever photos you want, Sarah. It's the least we can do. The last sentence hung in the air between us, loaded with unacknowledged guilt. Rebecca busied herself with adjusting a vase of fresh flowers, avoiding my eyes. Thank you, I said simply. I appreciate that. As promised, I took only the 5 photographs I'd selected. I didn't wander through the staged rooms claiming additional mementos, didn't argue over the paintings or the books or the small treasures that had made this house a home. There was no need. Soon enough, the decisions would be mine to make. As I was leaving, estate sale shoppers were already gathering in the driveway, clutching printed numbers that would determine their entry order. Collectors, dealers, and bargain hunters, eager to pick through the physical remnants of Mom's life. I passed them with a polite none. Didn't know you were coming. I texted her about the sale, Rebecca interjected. She's just claiming a few photographs. Michael nodded, descending the remaining stairs. Up close, I could see the subtle signs of someone under extreme pressure. A slight tremor in his hands, perspiration at his temples despite the air-conditioned interior. How are you doing? I asked quietly. He seemed taken aback by the simple inquiry, as if he'd prepared for accusations or demands but not basic human concern. Fine, busy with work. You know how it is. But I didn't know. Because Michael had never actually explained what he did in his finance job, had never shared the details of his supposedly successful life. Had that been to maintain distance or to conceal the gambling that was apparently consuming his resources? And you? He asked belatedly. Found a place to live? Not yet, I replied truthfully. I'm staying with a friend while I figure things out. An awkward silence fell, filled with everything unsaid. I wondered what he would do when he learned the truth. About the loan, about the real will, about Mom's knowledge of his addiction. Would he fight it legally? Deny everything? Disappear back to Boston and cut contact completely? Or was there a possibility, however small, that truth might set him free from the web of deception he'd constructed? I should finish upstairs before people arrive, he said, already retreating. Take whatever photos you want, Sarah. It's the least we can do. The last sentence hung in the air between us, loaded with unacknowledged guilt. Rebecca busied herself with adjusting a vase of fresh flowers, avoiding my eyes. Thank you, I said simply. I appreciate that. As promised, I took only the 5 photographs I'd selected. I didn't wander through the staged rooms claiming additional mementos, didn't argue over the paintings or the books or the small treasures that had made this house a home. There was no need. Soon enough, the decisions would be mine to make. As I was leaving, estate sale shoppers were already gathering in the driveway, clutching printed numbers that would determine their entry order. Collectors, dealers, and bargain hunters, eager to pick through the physical remnants of Mom's life. I passed them with a polite nod, carrying my small collection of framed memories to the car. Rebecca followed me out, her professional smile now firmly in place as she prepared to welcome the shoppers. At my car, she paused, seeming to struggle with something she wanted to say. Sarah, she began, then stopped, started again. I know this hasn't been easy for you. I waited, giving her space to continue. Mom's decision about the will. I want you to know I was surprised too. I thought she'd leave you something, the art supplies at least, or a small portion of the investments. Was this an olive branch? An acknowledgement of the injustice? Or just guilt-seeking absolution? It's okay, Rebecca, I said, meaning it more than she could possibly know. Everything works out the way it's supposed to in the end. She tilted her head slightly, perhaps catching something in my tone. What does that mean? I smiled gently. Just that life has a way of balancing the scales eventually. I'm at peace with where things stand, She studied me for a moment, confusion evident in her expression. My serenity didn't match her expectation of bitterness or desperation. Before she could probe further, a potential buyer called her name from the driveway, asking about early access to view furniture. "I should go," she said, already shifting back into real estate mode. "Take care, Sarah." "You too, Rebecca," I replied. "Good luck with the sale." I drove away from the house for what I knew would be the last time before it became mine again. The photograph sat carefully on the passenger seat, tangible pieces of a past that would soon connect to a very different future than my siblings imagined. The remaining days before the scheduled meeting with Patricia Hammond passed in a strange limbo, the calm before a storm only I could see approaching. I continued building my design business, finalized details for the job starting in August, and prepared mentally for the confrontation to come. On July 14th, the day before the revelation, I received an unexpected call from Patricia Hammond. "Sarah, I wanted to confirm our meeting tomorrow and ask about your preferences for how we proceed," she said. "Your mother left the logistics somewhat flexible." "What are the options?" I asked, sitting at Amelia's kitchen table with a cup of tea, sunshine streaming through the window onto a vase of fresh daisies, Mom's favorites. "We could meet privately first, review the will and supporting documentation, and then arrange a separate meeting with your siblings. Or they could be present from the beginning. Your mother wanted you to decide which approach would be less stressful for you." I considered the scenarios, weighing the potential reactions, the emotional dynamics, the practical outcomes. "I'd prefer if they were there from the beginning," I said finally. "A single meeting, everything laid out clearly, with you as a neutral mediator." "Are you certain?" Patricia asked. "It might become quite confrontational." "I'm certain," I replied. "I've had 3 months to prepare. I'm ready for whatever happens." After confirming the details, 10 a.m. at Patricia's office in Boulder, I spent the evening in quiet preparation, not rehearsing accusations or imagining triumphant scenarios, but centering myself in the truth of what Mom had wanted and the future I was building. I selected my outfit carefully, not the faded jeans and comfortable sweaters I'd worn during caregiving years, nor anything flashy or expensive. Instead, I chose clothing that reflected my emerging professional identity: tailored black pants, a jewel-toned blouse that brought out the green in my eyes, low heels that were practical yet polished. I laid out Mom's charm bracelet to wear alongside my watch, a tangible connection to her presence. That night, I sat on Amelia's back porch, watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness. Tomorrow would bring shock, anger, probably accusations from my siblings. The carefully constructed narrative they'd created, of their success, my inadequacy, their deservingness, would shatter against documented facts and legal reality. But beyond the immediate drama lay the more important question: what would I do with this inheritance? Not just the material assets, but the deeper legacy Mom had entrusted to me? The answer came with surprising clarity. I would use it to build rather than acquire, to create spaces for connection rather than barriers of privilege, to transform what had been a site of caregiving into a place of creativity and community. The house with its accessible features could become more than a private residence, perhaps partly a studio where I could work and teach design, with rooms maintained for artists who needed accessible space. The investments could provide security while funding scholarships for caregivers pursuing creative education. I wouldn't erase the past 5 years but would build upon them, honoring both Mom's physical legacy and her deeper values: creativity, compassion, presence. Morning arrived with remarkable calmness. I drove to Boulder with the windows down, the summer air carrying the scent of wildflowers from the roadside. Patricia Hammond's office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian near Pearl Street, its exterior painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. In the small waiting room, I found myself alone, the first to arrive. Patricia greeted me warmly, offering coffee and a quiet moment to center myself before the others arrived. You seem remarkably composed, she observed, handing me a ceramic mug of coffee. I've had time to process everything, I explained, and nothing that happens today will change what matters most, that Mom saw me, valued my choices, and wanted to ensure I could build a future beyond caregiving. Patricia nodded approvingly. Your mother would be proud of that perspective. At precisely 10 a.m., the office door opened to admit Michael and Rebecca. They entered together but not unified, separate entities moving in parallel rather than true allies. Rebecca wore another real estate outfit, this one in summer tones of coral and cream. Michael looked more put together than at the estate sale, but strain showed in the tightness around his mouth. Their expressions registered surprise at seeing me already seated in the conference room. Perhaps they'd expected this to be about estate technicalities, tax matters, final distributions. Perhaps they hadn't expected me to be included at all. Sarah, Rebecca said, her tone carefully neutral. I didn't realize you'd be here. Ms. Hammond invited me, I replied simply. Patricia gestured for them to take seats at the polished conference table. Thank you all for coming. I know this is an unexpected meeting, but there are important matters regarding Eleanor Lawson's estate that require immediate attention. Michael leaned forward slightly. What matters? Everything was settled months ago. Patricia opened a leather portfolio containing multiple documents. Actually, Mr. Lawson, that's not accurate. The will that was read in April was not your mother's final or legally binding will. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples of confusion across my siblings' faces. What are you talking about? Rebecca demanded. We have the executed will. The house is already in Michael's name. My financial advisor has already transferred the investment accounts. Those transfers were premature and will need to be reversed, Patricia stated calmly. Eleanor Lawson created a second, legally superior will approximately 18 months ago. That will supersedes the one you're familiar with. She removed a document from her portfolio and placed it on the table, turning it so Michael and Rebecca could read the title page, Last Will and Testament. Of Eleanor Grace Lawson. This is ridiculous, Michael said, his voice rising slightly. How can there suddenly be another will? Why are we just hearing about this now? Because that was Eleanor's explicit instruction, Patricia replied. She documented her reasons, thoroughly, both in the will itself and in supplementary materials. Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she looked from Patricia to me. Did you know about this, Sarah? The moment of truth had arrived. I met her gaze steadily. Yes. Mom left me a video explaining everything. I found it after the will reading in April. And you said nothing for 3 months? Michael's accusation carried both anger and disbelief. I followed Mom's instructions, I replied simply. She had specific reasons for the timing. Patricia intervened smoothly. Perhaps it would be best if I summarize the key provisions of the actual will, and then we can address questions. Without waiting for agreement, she began reading from the document. I, Eleanor Grace Lawson, being of sound mind and memory, hereby revoke all wills and codicils previously made by me and declare this to be my last will and testament. The legal preamble gave way to the substance. The house and property at 1487 Magnolia Street was bequeathed solely to Sarah Eleanor Lawson. The investment portfolio was to be divided with 70% to Sarah and 15% each to Michael and Rebecca. Personal. Possessions were to be distributed according to a separate memorandum, with the majority going to Sarah with specific exceptions noted for each sibling. Then came the paragraph about Michael's loan. I hereby formally recognize that the sum of $450,000 transferred to Michael Thomas Lawson on March 17, 2020, constitutes a loan, not a gift, as documented in the attached agreement. This amount, plus agreed-upon interest, is to be repaid to my estate before any distributions are made to Michael Lawson. If repayment is not possible, his inheritance shall be reduced accordingly. Michael's face had drained of color. Rebecca looked from him to Patricia with increasing alarm. "This can't be legal," Rebecca insisted. "We've already executed the other will. The property transfers are complete." "I assure you, Ms. Lawson, this will meets all legal requirements and was properly executed with witnesses and notarization," Patricia responded. "It includes clear language revoking all previous wills. The timing of its revelation was stipulated by your mother and does not affect its validity." "Why?" Michael asked, his voice barely audible. "Why would she do this?" Patricia glanced at me, silently asking if I wanted to answer. I nodded slightly. "Mom created the second will after discovering several things," I explained gently. "She learned about your gambling addiction, Michael, and that the business investment you claimed to need money for didn't exist. She also became aware that both of you were concerned primarily with preserving your inheritance rather than her care or quality of life." Michael flinched as if I'd struck him. Rebecca's perfectly maintained composure began to crack. "Quite different from the typical foundation site visit, isn't it?" Victoria turned with a polite smile. "Indeed, Marcus was just explaining their impressive backgrounds. Many of these young people are descendants of former Parkside workers," Eleanor noted. "There's a beautiful symmetry in them launching businesses in the same building where their grandparents once labored for others." The historical connection wasn't lost on Victoria. "A reinvention of the relationship between labor and ownership," she observed carefully. "Precisely," Eleanor agreed. "What Walter would have called the democratization of opportunity." As the two women continued their conversation, I stepped away to assist a student whose presentation technology needed adjustment. By the time I returned, Victoria had departed, but Eleanor remained, watching the young entrepreneurs with evident satisfaction. "She's evolving," Eleanor noted, nodding toward the door through which Victoria had exited. "Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. That's more than I expected." "People can surprise us when given the opportunity," I replied. "Indeed they can." Eleanor's gaze swept across the renovated industrial space now filled with youthful energy and innovation. "Walter would be pleased, not just with the building's transformation, but with how it's happened, through community leadership rather than external imposition." In that moment, looking around at the vibrant activity filling a space that had stood empty for 50 years, I felt the full circle of our journey. From being dismissed as the charity case at the gala to creating a model of community-led development that was influencing how even the Harrington Foundation itself operated. The remaining construction continued through the fall, with the complete grand opening scheduled for the following spring. Almost 2 years after that fateful gala, where Victoria's careless comment had first revealed the power dynamics we would need to navigate and ultimately transform. But Parkside was already coming alive, day by day, program by program, person by person. Former workers returned to share stories with youth. New entrepreneurs launched businesses in spaces where manufacturing had once thrived. Community members gathered for classes, meetings, and celebrations in rooms that had stood silent for decades. What had once been framed as charity, the benevolent gift of the privilege to the needy, had been reclaimed as justice. The resources flowing into East Westbrook through the Foundation's investment represented not generosity, but the return of value that should have benefited the community generations earlier. The building that Victoria had never imagined could represent the Foundation's values was now doing exactly that, but on terms defined by the community itself, with dignity and agency intact. And the charity case she had so casually dismissed at the gala had helped catalyze a shift in philanthropic practice that would ripple far beyond a single building or neighborhood. By uncovering historical truth and using it strategically rather than vengefully, we had created space for transformation rather than mere transaction. Standing in Parkside's rooftop garden, planted and maintained by community volunteers, and now flourishing with vegetables used by food entrepreneurs in the marketplace below, I could see East Westbrook spreading in all directions, not as a charity case, but as a community of resilience, creativity, and untapped potential, finally accessing the resources it had earned through generations of contribution to the city's prosperity. The story of Parkside wasn't finished. It was, in many ways, just beginning. But its evolution from abandoned factory to vibrant community-owned center represented a fundamental shift in whose voices shaped the narrative, whose hands guided the resources, and whose vision determined the future. The venue that had once belonged to the Harringtons had returned to its rightful community stewardship, not through revelation of legal ownership, but through recognition of moral truth. And in that recognition lay the seeds of deeper transformation for East Westbrook, for the foundation, and for a city beginning to reimagine the relationship between wealth and community in more equitable terms. Charity asks what the powerful are willing to give. Justice asks what the community has rightfully earned. At Parkside, we had shifted the conversation from the first question to the second, and in doing so, had begun to rewrite the story of what development could mean when those most affected by it held genuine authority to define its terms. As evening fell and lights came on throughout the building below, illuminating spaces where lives were being transformed through opportunity rather than aid, I thought about Victoria's dismissive words at the gala and smiled at how thoroughly they had been disproven, not through argument but through action, not through rejection but through strategic engagement that changed the terms of relationship itself. The charity case had revealed who really owned not just the venue, but the vision for what it could become. And in that revelation lay a model for communities everywhere, seeking not handouts, but the recognition of their inherent worth, wisdom, and right to self-determination. The lights of Parkside glowed against the deepening twilight, no longer an abandoned monument to broken promises, but a beacon of community possibility, and a testament to what can happen when historical truth becomes a foundation for future justice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.